following video features Charles A. Ravenna Jr., a lifelong member of this church who passed away some years ago, giving a history tour here to our Chi-Rho class of 1988. Please enjoy.
Located on the corner of Line Avenue and Kings Highway. And this is the building that houses the Kings Highway Christian Church. The church is the people. And this is the building that houses the people of Kings Highway Christian Church. We are going to take a tour of this architectural gem of a building to point out some of the more significant features and architectural symbolisms that were included in the completion of this building in 1925. Our tour director will be a beloved of Kings Highway Christian Church, Charles A. Ravenna Jr.
Of some of the symbolism of the church. This building is a Romanesque Byzantine church. The rounded arches and the columns and some of the interior arrangement is Byzantine in feeling. Notice the rounded arches. And Mr. Samuel G. Weiner, a Jewish architect, designed this building from sketches of the Catholic churches that he visited in the region of Bologna, Italy, the source of the finest church brick architecture in the world. And Mr. Weiner said to us in his notes that arches never sleep. That means they work 24 hours a day. And so that's what we are going to notice. There are some 800 arches in this building. If you'll notice at the eave line, there are little individual arches, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them when we get around on the other side of the church. But first of all, I would like for you to look at the ornament on top of the gable. That is the tree of life. It is a stylized tree of life, and it is, of course, of pottery. Then just underneath that eave line, you see these small arches, and notice that the working of the brick is completely different in each arch. No two arches are alike. That is just like us. Each one of us approaches religion from an individual standpoint. None of us see religion in exactly the same way. Now then, if you'll come down just a little bit, you will see a marble mosaic, the yellow and white configuration, and you'll notice there that there is a circle and three smaller circles around that. You have more than likely heard of the Trinity, the three in one, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Notice that inside of that circle is a triangle, and the vertex of that triangle points downward. Whenever you see a triangle with the vertex pointed downward, that is an indication that God is speaking to the people as they enter the church. Now, when you get inside, you will see that the triangles are so arranged that the vertex is up at the top, and that is man speaking to God. So this is something that so many people really do not know. All right, now then, when we come here to our place of meeting, we'll notice that God speaks to us as we enter the sanctuary of the church. Notice the rows of brick that protrude, and they are at even levels, and these rows of brick represent Jacob's ladder. For those of you who have studied about Jacob and remember that Jacob was in deep sleep and he wrestled with the holy characters, and that's when Jacob became Israel. So the 12 tribes of Israel are the 12 sons of Jacob. Now then, notice on either side of the entrance are what we call the dialogue mosaics. And by the way, the circle on either side, the circle is the most beautiful of all the geometric figures, and the circle has no beginning, no end, and that, of course, is the eternal love of God. The circle represents the eternal love of God. Notice up there that the vertices of the triangle are all within the circle, because God always keeps his promises to man. Now, when we get inside, you will see a little bit different configuration when we see the triangles with the vertex pointing upward. But first of all, let's say here that we have a, what kind of an arch? Roman arch. It's a rounded arch, and then just inside of that arch, right against the wall, you will notice the small circles, and these are said to represent the people who formed the first church at Pentecost. Those are the folks who formed it. Now then, notice your spelling. They ran King's Highway together, but actually King's Highway, two separate words. And at one time, over this was the Church of Christ, and so they had to replace that because this was not a Church of Christ. Notice the columns on either side. They are, of course, marble, and the capstones are some more symbols of the tree of life. So we have the tree of life there as the capstone. Okay, Rob, what you do right there? Okay, right over here, please. Notice the cornerstone of our building, King's Highway Christian Church, Anno Domini 1923-1925. 1923 is the year that the church was formed. 1925 was when this building was built. The A. Preston Gray, pastor. Dr. Gray was the pastor, the first minister of King's Highway Church. The architects were Jones, Resley, Alshner, and Wiener. And Mr. Sam Wiener is the man who gave us all of the information that we have. The builders were McConnell and McConnell. Then on this side of the cornerstone, we have the name of the chairman of the official board, Mr. J.D. Eubank, the chairman of the official board. The building committee, Sam W. Mason, chairman, and by the way, Mr. Mason was killed in an elevator accident back in the early 30s. A marvelous gentleman. Now, on this tablet of the cornerstone are the names of the people who served on the building committee, and if you will look at the names on there, you will recognize one name that you still see at King's Highway Church. What name does somebody see that you recognize as Blizzard? Mr. A.E. Blizzard Jr., the son of this man, is the chairman of the board now. So let's move on around.
We're now moving around to another area with the Chi-Rhos and the older Chi-Rhos getting the information from.
And then notice that within that main arch, there are three smaller arches. And what did we say about the 3 in 1? We call that the Trinity. Right, the Trinity. All right, now then, in the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, and I believe it's verse 8, there is a statement about the Christian putting on the full armor of God and the shield of faith. Can you see something up there that looks like a shield? You surely can. So many people miss that. Now then, you have to use some imagination on some of these symbols, people. So look at the indentations, those vertical things on either side out there that look like they recessed the brick, and those are the sword of righteousness. And then look at the black brick forming something. They are supposed to be circles, but they are stylized circles, because there's no way you can make square bricks, you see, into really perfect circles. But the dot inside of each circle represents the individual, and everything begins with the individual. Also, if you've ever seen pictures of some of the old middle-aged warriors, their armor was made out of chain, lengths of chain. And that sort of reminds you of those lengths of chain there. And that, of course, is called the armor of integrity. Now, another word for integrity is honesty, complete honesty. The armor that will take care of everybody is the armor of honesty, integrity. Now there, of course, again, you see the brick that looks like Jacob's ladder, when Jacob became Israel. Now let's go over here just a little bit closer. And those are man-made stones. They are not dug out of the ground. But then on either side, how many of those stones do you see? 5 on each side. What is something that contains the number 10 that you know about? The 10 Commandments. These are called the 10 Commandment windows. And you'll notice over here that these windows are very much the same style. Now then, look up in the little arches, and you will notice that, as I told you, that the brick is going to be arranged all the same way, isn't it? Okay. Now then, I want you to look up here, and I want you to see if you can find the one that has the Coke bottle in it. Come on, walk on up here and see if you come to one of these. All right. Miss Thompson says there's one up there. And there's also a beer bottle up there. Okay, keep looking now. Keep looking. Keep moving. Keep moving.
A beer bottle or a...
Can you see the Coke bottle and the beer bottle in the same little arch? Have you found them, Michael? Have you found them?
Right up there in the middle.
All right, there in the very center of that. Look over there. Look over there. Those look like beer bottles, and that's what they are. They're beer bottles. Okay? I don't know what they did on. Go on into the front doors again. Church where we have a vaulted ceiling. You'll notice there the vaulted ceiling. And the floor is brick tile, and it has a finish on it so that it can be waxed and cleaned easily. But this is called the narthex. So if you ever get an announcement that says meet so-and-so in the narthex, then you will know where to come. Now, as you look forward you should recognize that you are standing at the foot of a cross. This is a cruciform church. The cross, the main portion, the body of the cross is right here. And what is the first thing that comes to mind when you look forward? What two things really impress you most? The communion table and the baptistry. They are the two sacraments of the Christian church. The reason that the baptistry is one of the brightest places is that once a person is baptized, the old life is cast away and the new life emerges. And that's why we have the baptistry as the brightest spot. Again, you notice there the Trinity, do you not? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And also you have the little tiles up there between the three small arches and the main arch. And those two represent those people who were members of the first church at Pentecost. Okay. Now, as you come in, I want you to notice that this ceiling is the blue of heaven. The ceiling of the side aisles, all of this, and I want you to know that this is the original paint that was put here in 1925 when the church was built, and it has not been repainted. I think it's remarkable that the paint has held as it has through the years. Okay? Now then, if you will, I'd like for you to just sit down here for just a few minutes and let me point out some more things so that you can see what we have. Okay? Are called the Apostles' Arches. Now you can read about this in the book of the Revelation of John. Now it mentions that there were 4 arches on each side. It was square. Of course, this is architectural license, just as artistic license or musical license when you start to do a song or something of the sort. But each of these arches would represent one of the apostles. Now notice that over the arch is the capstone there. Not the capstone, but the keystone. And the keystone is representative of Christ. And then the 4 stones, the 2 on either side, represent the gospel writers. Now, Miss Margaret Batchelder told me an interesting story this morning about this, that when they were building this church, and she was just a little bit, we don't wear your hat in the church, okay? All right. Now then, she said that when she and a girl by the name of Annie Woodle, who was here, they were a little bit younger than you, but all of these building materials were stacked out on the lot. And they looked and they thought, gosh, every one of these things is imperfect. They didn't use the word imperfect. They just said that it's a second. How in the world are they going to ever do it? They must be planning to put those on the back of the building where they won't show. But actually, the person from whom I learned most of my information about the symbolism of the church, Mrs. Schuler, who spent a lot of time on it, said that the architect mentioned that this is terracotta, it's man-made, and the little imperfections in it cause the arches to be strengthened by their imperfections. Now notice also the capstones. Now these stones on the base of the arch here, notice that they're also terracotta. And notice that the angles are cut off. This represents martyrdom because all of the apostles died martyrs' deaths. All of the apostles, all of Christ's 12 died as a result of that. Now then, I want to just mention something else to you. This church was built when there was no such thing as air conditioning. And these windows still open. You can still open these windows, and on Tuesday when Clara cleans the sanctuary, she opens these windows and lets a little fresh air in, and then she runs the vacuum and she does all of the dusting and so on. But there was an oscillating fan up on each one of these little standards here. You notice the electric plug there? And the oscillating fans were there, and all during church the fans would be going back and forth like this, oscillating back and forth, until the preacher started his sermon. And then the fans were cut off, and Osborne Funeral Home used to provide little cardboard fans with Osborne Funeral Home on the back of them, and everybody sat here listening to the sermon and fanning. That was the only way you could keep even halfway cool.
Don't forget about the ice.
Oh, don't worry. Now, don't go tell all my secrets. I've still got some neat things up my sleeve here for you. But the thing is that the forced air, this was called a forced air system. And on either side, you can see this arch back there that has that chain link, black, dark-looking brick. And then for those you over here, you can more than likely see that. Those were open, and they had sort of louvers that looked a little bit like Venetian blinds, but that's where the forced air came out to help cool the building. And this was considered very modern. It wasn't too efficient, though, I'll tell you. But anyhow, these are the things that the people endured. Now, if you'll notice, all of these windows, the insides of these windows remind you of the Trinity also. There are so many things that remind you of the same thing, but they are shown a little bit different. Now then, I don't know, 20 years ago, the young people had their assembly here at Kings Highway, and they asked me to do a tour of the building like I'm doing with you now. And so I didn't say anything, but I just said to them, look up above you, and what do you think that might be? And so, does anybody have any ideas? Yes, sir.
It's like a railroad track.
It looks like a what?
Something like a big railroad track.
All right, it reminds you of something. How about it?
Noah's Ark.
Pardon?
Noah's Ark.
An aeronaut?
Noah's Ark.
Oh, Noah's Ark. I tell you, I'm a little bit hard of hearing in this ear, so you've got to speak up a little bit now and let me hear. But that reminds you of the superstructure of Noah's Ark. It surely does. And a very famous French architect came in here to Kings Highway just after this church was built, and he said that Kings Highway Church was the one permanent building in Shreveport, possibly that you might have to change or replace the wooden portions of the building, but the brick portions, and by the way, these walls are at least 2 feet thick, and you just can't believe the construction, the solid construction. But a brick mason told me just recently that you would not be able to afford to pay the price that brick masons demand now, because you can't get this work. He says, I can do this kind of work, but it would cost them $75 an hour, and just think of the hours that it would take to do something like this. Now notice also that your light fixtures, and by the way, these light fixtures are wrought iron, and they were made in Belgium particularly for this church. And again, what do they remind you of? The Trinity. Again, you have the Trinity. Now then, look over here at the sides, and the solid rectangular slabs on either side represent the old tabernacle in the wilderness that we had there at the very beginning. That is the best that we can say for those. Yes, sir.
How come the real white
Stones down either side of the arch there. How many do you see? There are 12 down each side. Somebody said 13? Oh, don't count the middle one. The middle one is the keystone, remember? And we asked just for the numbers on the sides. Okay. Now then, this is also described as the eternal love of God, and then those small figures inside of that circle represent God's people there at the beginning of Pentecost. Look right there, through that. You have that. All right, now then, yes, sir. What do people do when they come to church? They are trying to speak to God, aren't they? All of us try to speak to God when we come to church. We pray, we sing, we listen to the sermons, we do everything that is of significance where He is concerned. And these marble mosaics represent man speaking to God. Now look, can you see that the corners of those triangles extend beyond the circle? Okay, if your triangle is kept within the circle, and that means God keeps His promise, what does the fact that the vertices of the triangle sticking out beyond that circle mean? What would you think? Does man always keep his promise to God? Do we always keep our promise to God? No, sir, we don't. But we can keep trying, can't we? And that's what we will need to do. All right, now then, look at the next arch there, and the keystone there is Christ. Look and see if you can tell me what that arch represents. Pardon? What? Okay, I see more than 10. All right, so what would you call it? You would call it the disciples' arch. Christ and the 12 disciples' arch. Okay? Or the apostles, 12 apostles rather than, well, they were still disciples. Over here to your right. What happens there? The sermon. All right, we have the sermon. The preacher delivers the sermon to the people. Okay? Now then, look at the ironwork around there. Would that ironwork remind you of the tree of life? It has to be symbolic, of course. The tree of life symbols. Now that was there from the beginning. That also was done in Belgium. Now, I guess it's been 20 or more years ago, one of the young boys in our congregation, Alvin Blizzard III, died as a result of a brain tumor. Have you heard the name Blizzard before this afternoon? Okay, we've heard it twice. Once on the cornerstone, and then once about the man who's now chairman of the board. He is the man who helps really run the church. Okay. But many people gave money for Alvin, in memory of Alvin Blizzard III. And so they decided that we needed a lectern. The lectern is over on the left here. And it's very close to the same design as the pulpit. But we could not find out the name of the foundry that developed the pulpit in Belgium. And so finally, some of the members of the church went to one of the members who was a welder by trade. His name was Lloyd Holliday. And Mr. Holliday said, I will try to do it. And so Mr. Holliday designed and built the lectern. Now that, of course, as you know, where Reverend Miles Cook generally stays on Sunday morning. He reads there from the Bible. He maybe does more or whatever. So that is the lecture. Do you remember having seen a picture that is called The Last Supper, painted by Leonardo da Vinci? This table is an exact copy or replica of the table in the painting of The Last Supper. Yes, sir. Well, it would have had to be large in order to accommodate Christ and the 12, wouldn't it? Yes. But this is still the same thing. Now, you know that anytime you start to do a program here and you need the whole chancel up there, you can take that communion table apart and move it out of the way and then use the entire chancel for your performance, whatever it is. Okay? Now then, I want us to move up to the very, let's get up to the steps. This beautiful dialogue mosaic. Look at your, this is really not black marble, it's called green marble. It is imported marble, all of this is. And notice here how the workman worked this marble around the circle, came all the way around, and completed that. It just keeps going. All right? What do these top triangles represent? Okay?
I know it, where it means that God's love never ends.
All right, God's love is eternal. It never ends. Right. That's the first thing. Okay, now what about these triangles that are here at the top?
People speaking to God.
God speaking to people. Okay, now what about the bottom triangles? We're speaking to God. And what do these diamonds, as you call them, now remember that these are squares that are turned up on a point there. They are squares, but this is the four-square life, the Christian life. And so, by God and man talking together, they help us to form Christian lives. Notice also here, Laura, I notice that you're touching these crosses, okay? And really now, one of the men, Mr. Louis Throgmorton, gave these in memory of his mother. Notice that the arms of the cross are what we call budded. And this, of course, is another sign of...
The Trinity.
No, it could be, but martyrdom. These people were martyred. That meant that they died a life of a martyr. Okay. Now then, you notice this, that when the elders put the covers back on these emblem trays, that they always keep these crosses right so that everybody can see the crosses there. Okay, now here's your elevated cross. Faith, hope, love, and then of course the empty cross showing Christ's victory over death, over the cross itself. Okay, Rob?
I have a question about this.
All right.
What is it? Is that...
All right.
Always heard it was in his service.
In his service is as good as anything because, of course, Christ did give his life in his service, did he not? Okay. Now then, I'm going to show you something that some family would be glad. Okay.
What are these candlesticks for?
All right. What about the candles for lighting, for illumination? Okay. Okay, Kathy.
Is the balloon up there the same as the balloon out there?
Yes, it is. It's the same blue. It has never been changed. And it's also the same blue that's over those side aisles there.
Is that the...
You don't ever see this, but this is something that you need to see. Before the days of air conditioning, you know, we had the forced air system that I told you about, and the air came up through here and went out into the congregation. There was a a blower that caused it to move the air. There was a member of our congregation who owned an ice house. And you of course don't remember the Iceman, but when we were growing up, there was an old horse-drawn wagon that was covered, and there were 100-pound blocks of ice in that wagon, and people had what they called ice boxes at home, and the ice box would hold the ice for just about 1 day. And of course it kept the fruits and vegetables and meats in good condition for just that day. And then the next day the Iceman had to come back. And some days, maybe if it was sort of cool outside, you would congregation, and it did make it a little bit more bearable. So we have here this part of the forced air system. Reverend Claudel Jones and his wife Annie Stevens Jones came to Shreveport, and they met a little old lady, Mrs. Teeple, T-E-E-P-L-E, Mrs. Teeple, and she lived down on Oakland Street. Now, all of you know where the City Hall is today, do you not? Well, the blonde brick church that is down there now, it is now a black Methodist church. It's called St. James. In those days, it was called Central Christian Church. And that was where most of us grew up in our early years. But anyhow, in 1898, in Mrs. Teeple's parlor at her home on Oakland Street, Claudel Jones met with 14 people who decided to start the Christian church in Shreveport. And so from that, there was a move to form the Central Christian Church. And believe it or not, at one time that church was meeting in the old First Baptist Church downtown. When the church was located down there, they had to meet on Sunday afternoon because being in the Baptists used it in the morning. And also, there was a church there in the basement while the white people were in their service. The blacks were downstairs having their services down in the basement of the church. So this is just a little thing for you to remember. But actually, you can see that in 1998, Central Christian Church will be 100 years old. It's just 25 years older than Kings Highway. Now then we come to why Kings Highway. In 1922, just about 1 year before the 25th anniversary, the board of Central Christian Church decided that we needed a church in southeast Shreveport. At that time, South Highlands was a separate town. Peterborough was a separate town. Each of them had their own mayors, their own water wells, and everything. And so they decided to locate on this corner. Now they had their choice. They could buy the lots across the street there, or they could have bought this. And they chose this, and I'm glad they did because it seems to have worked very, very nicely through it. Okay, this church. Now, by the way, I've got to this. It was just slapped together. It really wasn't much of a church building, but it served its purpose. And that was 1923, and they used that for Sunday school rooms for quite a while. And then they saw that they built this beautiful building. And by the way, this building cost $106,700. Today you couldn't begin to pay for it. At least $10 million, I would say. No less. But what is so beautiful about the old tabernacle is that the people didn't have any money. The Depression had come. And so the men came at night and began tearing the old tabernacle down. And the next day, the women would bring their small children up here, and they would back the nails out of the boards and stack the boards so that when the men got through, they could put those boards back into a building. And they built what we call the second tabernacle. That was 1935. See, that's a long time ago to you folks. You just can't realize that. But, of course, 1935, I was a young man. So, you see, we've been through what you're going through now, all of us. But then in 1953, they built a little chapel, and Reverend Arthur Depew was our minister, and the office wing here and the parlor wing. Then in 1969, the Elizabeth Stewart Strange Children's Building, where you folks have grown up, all of you. But let me just say this to you. There is a lot of history here at Kings Highway, and believe you me, I hope that you will continue making that history yourselves, because you are the future of the church. And I hope that someday that you, when I am no longer here to do it, I hope that some of you will tell some other young people about Kings Highway Christian Church and what it means. It's been just wonderful being with you this afternoon, and if I seem to be sort of hard-nosed, I'm really not.